Want SQL Server, but don't want the commitment of, well, installing it? Let's try SQL Server in a container. Welcome to this video on SQL Server. My name is Kevin Fiesel. I'm the proprietor of Catalyxy Services LLC, a consulting firm which specializes in work all across the data platform space, but especially SQL Server. In the prior video, I showed you how to install SQL Server on a machine running some supported flavor of Linux. But that's not the only place you're likely to find SQL Server on Linux floating around. More often, you'll see it in containers. Microsoft officially supports running SQL Server on Linux in a Docker container, and they provide images which make it easy for us to try it out. Now, you might be asking, why would I want SQL Server running in a container? Well, there are a few reasons, so allow me to illuminate you. First up, running SQL Server in containers makes it easy to try things out with little commitment. Want to check out that new version of SQL Server? Grab the latest image and spin up a container. When you're done, you can stop, delete the container, and you're good to go. Another great use case covers automated testing. One of the most challenging parts of automated integration testing is that it relies on having specific data. Yet some of the things we want to test necessarily modify the data. You can build processes to mitigate this, but wouldn't it be nicer if we could just destroy and recreate the database as part of the deployment process? Containers make that easy for you. When it comes to training, I love using containers because I know that everyone's going to have the same experience. The database is exactly the state I need it to be in at the beginning of training. Even better, the next time I deliver the same training, I can create a new container and know that there's no way to forget running scripts to reset my environment to some pre-training state. Long story short, there are some good reasons to use SQL Server in a container. Do keep in mind that you're going to have the same limitations on what you can do that we have in SQL Server on Linux, but for most of what people use SQL Server to do, it'll work fine. One last thing before we get started. You'll need some sort of containerization software, and to ensure that your computer supports containerization. As far as computer support goes, most modern PCs and pretty much every server supports containerization, though you might need to enable a BIOS setting to get things working. When it comes to software, there are some choices. On Windows, your best bet is Docker for Desktop, which is free for personal use, but costs money in commercial settings. If you do use Docker for Desktop on Windows, make sure that you're running Linux containers instead of Windows containers. You can only run one type at a time, and that type should always and everywhere be Linux. Sorry, Windows container enthusiasts. For Mac OS, there are several options, including Docker for Desktop and Lima. What do I recommend? I have no idea. I don't use Macs. The containerization story is a bit more complex on Linux, where you'll have plenty of options available to you. I like to use Moby as my container orchestration runtime. It's an open source project created by the people at Docker. Speaking of Docker, there are consumer and enterprise editions of it available too for Linux. And if you don't like Docker at all, well, there are alternative ways to get to that sweet containerd goodness. We've done enough chit chat. Let's build some containers.
This demo is all about installing SQL Server via container. And I've got here a Windows machine opened up to the Windows terminal, specifically a PowerShell terminal. And I also have Docker for Desktop already installed on this machine. With that in place, I'm going to be able to perform a couple of actions to grab the latest SQL Server image and work with it. First thing I want to do is run a Docker pull command, and I'm going to hit the Microsoft Container Registry, mcr.microsoft.com. Microsoft no longer hosts their images in Docker Hub. They've moved it over to mcr.microsoft.com. From there, I select MS SQL and get the latest tagged version of SQL Server 2022. This is going to cause a little bit of download. I need to get several layers of container images. So let's jump ahead to the end here. We've got all of our images in place. We can see that I was able to get a later version of the packaged image for SQL Server 2022, and now I have that available to me locally. What that means is I'm going to be able to create a new Docker container using the Docker run command, and I do need to send in an environment parameter that says accept EULA equals Y. I need to send another one that includes the SA password. because I don't want to show you a real password, I'm going to put in a fake one here. And then port 1433 will actually be mapped to my port 51433. I'll name this thing SQL Container. We'll have a host name of SQL Container, and the specific image that we're using is the one that we just downloaded, SQL Server 2022 latest container. Kicking this off, it's going to take a moment to start up that SQL Server container. Once it's started, we get a SHA-256 hash that represents what that container is. I can also reference it using the name SQL Container because that's what I named it. At this point, we have a functional container, and if I run docker ps, we can see that it is actively running. It's been up for a few seconds and is mapping the internal port 1433 to my external port 51433, which means that if I want to be able to connect to it, I need to connect using port 51433. My server that I'll choose is dot, because it's localhost, comma 51433, not 1433. I'll use a SQL login because I specified the SA account. This is not so secretly running SQL Server on Linux in the container. And let's connect to it. What we have here is our databases, just like we saw in SQL Server on Linux. But we can go a little bit further. One of the major advantages to Docker containers for SQL Server is that I can pre-stage a lot of work. What I mean by this is, let's say that I've worked on creating a special demo database, and I don't know if you're going to run a particular version of SQL Server locally, but I do know that you have Docker installed. In my case on Windows, this is Docker for desktop. You might have a Mac and you'll use Docker for desktop on Mac or something else. Regardless of what tool you're using, I want to be able to share this demo database with you, and instead of trying to keep some sort of backwards compatible .back file that goes back to maybe 2014 or 2017 or something, I want to be able to just give you a container. I've already done this before with a couple of my demos. This isn't a tutorial on how to do it. This is more of a tutorial on how to work with this if somebody has done it for you. So let's stop and remove SQL Container. It's gone. That SQL Server instance never existed. I don't know what you're talking about. Next, I have here the approaching zero database. And this is a presentation that I put together a while ago. I'm going to paste in, go grab the approaching zero DB, and then I'm going to run it. Again, port 51433. If I were to kick off this container, we can see that it's doing some work. This is actually a slightly older version of SQL Server on Linux. This is not 2022, so there is some text that's getting written onto screen that you don't see in a later version. And I can connect to localhost on port 51433 using a password that I have pre-staged. So my SA password is some bad password, like I showed you there. So we can connect to that instance, 51433, using SA and that bad password. And on there, I've got not just the master database and MSDB and such, but I also have my database that I want to be able to use for demos. So this is all pre-staged, it's prepped, it's ready to go. You're going to be able to follow along in the demos just like I would when I'm giving a presentation. Makes life a lot easier that way.
Over the course of this video, we downloaded the Microsoft SQL Server 2022 container image and spun up a new container using it. Then, we grabbed a pre-created demo database and connected to it. There's a lot more we can do with containers running SQL Server, not to mention the container orchestration system Kubernetes. But that's going to have to wait for a future video. We'll have links and show notes in the description below. And until we see each other in the next video, take care.